In a Paris hotel room, the man who built the Champion spark plug empire collapses into the arms of a friend and dies, 50 years old, from what the coroner will quietly rule a weak heart, exactly 1 hour after a former prizefighter punched him in the chest at the Crillon Bar. His name is stamped on millions of engines around the world. By the time he hits the floor, it's already stopped being legally his. 6,000 miles away, in Toledo, Ohio, a different company, also called Champion, is shipping spark plugs to Ford by the railcar load that same week, making its owners some of the richest men in America. Nobody in that office will hear about the death in Paris for days. 2 empires, 1 name. Neither of them legally belongs to the man who just died. The real story of Champion is a coachman's son from Paris who refused to let a single sketch, a small ceramic cylinder no bigger than your thumb, be stolen from him twice, and who built 2 rival empires out of pure stubbornness, only to lose his name to both of them before he died. What started as a small ceramic insulator, a piece of kiln-fired French clay no bigger than a child's finger designed to stop electricity from grounding against hot metal, ended up igniting the biplane engines that flew over the trenches of the First World War, Henry Ford's automotive empire, Charles Lindbergh's transatlantic crossing, Amelia Earhart's solo Atlantic flight, and the second and third stage rocket engines that pushed Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins to the surface of the moon in 1969. 1 spark plug, 1 name, 2 rival empires. The man who made all of it possible has been almost entirely forgotten. Albert Champion was rejected by his own company. In 1905, fresh off a leg-shattering racing crash and broke, he walked into Boston with a sketch of a porcelain spark plug in his pocket. He needed exactly $2,000 to start a factory. 2 brothers, Frank and Robert Stranahan, gave him the money. They incorporated the Albert Champion Company in the South End, in the famous Cyclorama building. Frank Stranahan became treasurer. His younger brother Spencer became a clerk. Albert, the inventor whose name was literally on the door, became, on paper, the president. By 1907, the company was selling porcelain plugs stamped Champion. By the summer of 1908, a third Stranahan brother, Robert A., the youngest, just out of Harvard, had walked into the stockroom, looked over the books, and quietly concluded that Albert Champion was the problem, not the solution. He was too volatile, too French, too obsessed with redesigning the product, too uninterested in cost control. So they pushed him out. He brought a new spark plug design back to the board and asked permission to manufacture it. The answer was no. He brought the idea of expanding into magnetos and electrical components. The answer was no. He asked finally to take the company name, his own name, the name on his birth certificate, and use it on a new venture. The answer, again, was no. According to the authors of the Buick, A Complete History, when General Motors founder Billy Durant later told Albert he wasn't interested in buying the Champion Company name, only the plugs, Albert shot back, "I am very much interested in the name. That's my name." He had no money left, no board behind him, and no legal claim to the word champion anymore. What he did have was 1 leg 2 inches shorter than the other from a racing accident that nearly killed him, a temper that would later become legendary on the factory floor, and a single, simple, stubborn conviction that a porcelain spark plug would not crack, and that he was the man who was going to prove it. It's 1907. You are standing on a packed dirt road outside Detroit, watching a man in a 3-piece suit kneeling beside a stalled automobile. He's been there for 40 minutes with a small folding knife and a piece of cloth, doing the same thing every driver in America does roughly every 50 miles in 1907. He's cleaning his spark plugs. Look, in 1907, the inside of an automobile engine is a tiny, undisciplined hell. Combustion temperatures swing from cold start to over 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit in seconds. The 2 materials engineers had tried to use as electrical insulators, mica and early porcelain. Both failed in opposite ways. Mica absorbed engine moisture and fouled. Porcelain, made with the wrong clay, cracked under thermal shock the instant a cold engine fired hot. Every misfire meant the driver had to climb out, unscrew the plug, scrape the carbon, hope it didn't shatter in his fingers, and screw it back in. Drivers couldn't just buy a better spark plug. There wasn't one. The Raja Company supplied Buick. Newport made them in France. Half a dozen small workshops in America made hand-assembled plugs that lasted, on average, a few hundred miles before they cracked, fouled, or melted. There was no industry, there was no standard, so drivers learned to live with it. Spark plug wrench in the toolbox, always. they drove slowly, they didn't drive at night, they didn't drive in the rain, and entire car companies, including Buick, which by 1908 was the largest automaker in America, built their reputations not on power or comfort, but simply on whether their engines would start in the morning. Not a market that wanted a better spark plug. In the summer of 1908, two men crossed paths inside a Boston Buick dealership, and the conversation that followed would decide whose name survived the next 50 years. Albert Champion, recently pushed out of his own company, walked in with prototype spark plugs in his coat pocket. William C. Durant, the man who 4 weeks later would incorporate General Motors, was in town on business. Durant picked up one of Albert's plugs. He turned it over in his hand. He saw the kiln-fired porcelain insulator. He saw what nobody at Raja had figured out. That ceramic could be made to not crack if you got the clay right. Honestly, Durant moved fast because Buick was paying outside suppliers a fortune for plugs that failed in the field, and every failure was a complaint that landed on Durant's desk. He could make Albert's plug cheaper in-house and stop the complaints at the same time. Albert said yes because he had nothing left in Boston, because the Stranahans owned his name, because Durant was offering him a factory in Flint, Michigan, on the top floor of the Buick plant. 1 week after Albert Champion arrived in Flint, Durant signed the papers that created General Motors. In October 1908, Albert incorporated his second company. He called it Champion Ignition. He hung his name on the door for the second time in 3 years. He had no idea, walking into Buick Factory number 1 that month, that he was about to lose his name a second time, to the people he had walked away from in Boston. By 1910, the Stranahan brothers were in serious trouble. They had kept the Champion name, but Albert had taken the inventor. Their Boston factory was running on fumes. Their books showed roughly $20,000 in debt, about $600,000 in today's dollars, and no contracts to refill the order book. They were 2 years from closing. Then, a Toledo automaker called Willys Overland, at the time the second largest car company in America, offered them a lifeline. Exclusive supplier deal. On one condition: pack everything up and move to Toledo. The Stranahans moved. They incorporated in Wilmington, Delaware as the Champion Spark Plug Company. 2 years later, they signed an almost identical contract with a small family-owned automaker an hour north of Toledo in Dearborn, Michigan. The family was the Fords. The company was selling several 100,000 Model Ts a year. That $20,000 debt was erased in months. The Stranahans went from nearly bankrupt to spectacularly rich. And then they sued Albert Champion. The lawsuit, filed in United States federal court, claimed prior rights to the Champion brand name, arguing they had been selling Champion-stamped spark plugs since 1907, a year before Albert had even arrived in Flint. That lawsuit dragged on, and on, and on. It outlasted the Model T's first redesign. It outlasted the First World War. It outlasted Billy Durant's removal from General Motors, the rise of Alfred P. Sloan, and the reorganization of GM into a modern corporation. Sloan, who would later name Albert Champion president of the AC Spark Plug division, once said of him, "The keynote of Champion's success was that he was never satisfied. His mind was open to the necessity for constant improvement." He said it as a compliment. It was also a description of a man the industry couldn't contain. The legal bills alone by the early 1920s were eating into money that could have funded a second factory. Albert paid them anyway, year after year, because the alternative was watching the Stranahans put Champion on every box that shipped out of Toledo without a fight. For 14 years, two companies named Champion sold spark plugs in the same country, in the same magazines, to the same dealers, while their lawyers fought over the man whose actual name was Champion. The cost meant Albert finally folded. In 1922, an out-of-court settlement was reached. Albert kept his factory, his contracts, his patents, and his place inside General Motors. He gave up only one thing: his name. The Champion Ignition Company was renamed on paper the AC Spark Plug Company for his initials, only his initials. The Stranahans in Toledo kept the word Champion on every box of plugs that ever shipped to Ford, to Willys Overland, to every garage in America. By 1927, the year of Lindbergh's solo crossing of the Atlantic, a flight powered, ironically, by AC plugs made in Flint, he had won. He had also lost. And the company he had built, under the name AC, the name he had been forced to take when the Stranahans took the word Champion from him, kept going. In 1969, AC igniter spark plugs were used to fire the second and third stage rocket engines that carried Apollo 11 to the moon. In 1974, AC Spark Plug merged with United Delco to form AC Delco, today a division of General Motors producing roughly 70,000 separate components for cars all over the world. Albert Champion was inducted into the Automotive Hall of Fame. In 2015, the city of Flint erected a life-size bronze statue of him downtown, the city that had run his factory for nearly a century finally putting his face on a street corner. And in Toledo, Ohio, the Stranahan's Champion Spark Plug Company, the one Albert had been pushed out of in 1908, survived every recession of the 20th century, eventually becoming part of Federal Mogul, where the Champion brand still sells spark plugs in over 150 countries. None of the dealers stocking those boxes today. All that survived into the present is the name on the box, and the quiet, unresolved question of which name actually earned it.